The Duke's reputation terrified her. But on their wedding night he whispered, "I've been weighed." The wind howled through the ancient forest, carrying the scent of rain and earth. Lady Eveline clutched the edge of her cloak as her carriage rolled along the winding path. Each creaking wheel echoed through the towering trees, as if warning her of the unknown that awaited. She had heard the tales, of course. The rumors of Duke Cale's cruel reputation, of the shadowed halls of his ancestral castle perched atop cliffs, and the strange lights seen flickering from its towers at night. Yet here she was, traveling willingly into a world that chilled her very soul. Her heart pounded with fear, but beneath it thrummed an uneasy curiosity. Who was this man she was to marry, whose name alone made nobles shiver? She tried to recall the words her mother had spoken. "Courage, Eveline. Even a heart full of fear can endure the night if it beats with purpose." The carriage came to a halt at the gates of the castle. Towering spires pierced the stormy sky, lightning illuminating jagged walls as if daring the heavens themselves to strike. Eveline stepped down, her boots crunching against the stone path. A servant led her inside, their lantern casting long, dancing shadows across the high corridors. The air smelled of old wood, wax, and something faintly metallic, a reminder that this place was alive with secrets. She reached the grand hall where the wedding ceremony would take place. Velvet banners hung along the walls, and chandeliers flickered, throwing their light unevenly across the marbled floors. Nobles whispered as she entered, their eyes curious, judgmental, and tinged with fear. She felt their gaze on her, assessing whether she would survive her union with the infamous Duke. Then, the doors opened. He appeared. Duke Cale. The rumors had painted him a monster, but seeing him in person stirred something more complex than fear. He was tall, regal, and commanding. His black hair fell just to his shoulders, eyes dark and piercing as if he could see through the walls of her mind. Yet there was something restrained in his manner, a careful precision that suggested control over forces far older than any court intrigue. Eveline's heart stuttered. She tried to remind herself that he was her husband now, a man she must respect, perhaps even trust, but the tension between them was like electricity, charged, dangerous, yet impossible to ignore. The ceremony began, the priest's voice echoing against the stone walls. Eveline barely heard the words, distracted by Cale's quiet observation. He did not speak to her, but his gaze lingered, unwavering, as if cataloging every fear and hope she carried. Her pulse quickened. She wanted to flee, yet some deeper instinct rooted her to the spot. After the ceremony, the guests departed, leaving the castle in a heavy, oppressive silence. The storm outside had intensified, rain battering against the tall windows. Eveline's hand trembled as she ascended the grand staircase toward her chamber. Each step seemed louder than the last, echoing through empty corridors that twisted like a maze. She paused at the doorway, glancing back toward the hall where Cale had stood moments before. A sense of foreboding pressed against her chest, but beneath it was a flicker of curiosity, a desire to understand the man whose reputation terrified the kingdom. Her chamber was dimly lit, furnished with heavy drapes and an enormous bed carved from dark wood. Shadows pooled in the corners, moving almost as if alive. Eveline drew a deep breath and tried to calm her nerves, but her thoughts were restless. What kind of man awaited her? What darkness had his life held, and would it reach her too? A sudden knock at the door made her jump. "It is I," Cale's voice said, low and controlled. "May I enter?" Eveline's stomach tightened. She hesitated but nodded. The door creaked open, and there he stood. In the dim candlelight his features were sharp, yet there was a softness to his eyes, a depth that few had ever witnessed. "Hi," Eveline began, then faltered, unsure what to say. Cale stepped closer, his presence overwhelming yet strangely comforting. "Do not be afraid," he said almost gently, though there was an edge beneath his words. "The night is long, but you are safe here, for now." She swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. I have heard stories of your powers and of the shadows in this castle." He studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, in a voice so quiet it seemed almost like a sigh, he said, "Yes, the stories are true, but most are exaggerated. Fear makes tales grow." Eveline's curiosity ignited. "Then why does everyone fear you?" Cale's gaze shifted to the window, where the storm raged outside. "Because the shadows I guard are dangerous. Not all darkness can be tamed, but I have learned to control it, for now. And soon, you will see that fear is not always what it seems." The weight of his words pressed upon her. There was a promise and a threat, intertwined in a single breath. Eveline felt her pulse quicken. Despite the fear that clung to her, she could not deny the magnetic pull of this man, the way he commanded the room with mere presence. Hours passed in a strange silence, filled only with the sound of rain and distant thunder. Eveline lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm her racing heart. Her thoughts kept returning to him, to his gaze, to the sense that beneath his fearsome reputation lay something else, something vulnerable, something waiting to be discovered. Then, as the clock struck midnight, a shadow moved across the room. Eveline froze. Cale was there, standing at the foot of her bed. He did not move hastily or rudely, but with a quiet, deliberate presence. The shadows of the room seemed to cling to him, as if the darkness itself obeyed his command. "I have waited for this night," he said, his voice a whisper that stirred her blood. "Not out of duty, but something older. Something I cannot name easily." Eveline's breath caught. Fear and fascination battled inside her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Cale stepped closer, but not threateningly. His eyes softened, revealing a glimpse of a man who had spent years in solitude, burdened by shadows not of his choosing. "I have waited for someone who could understand me, who could see past the darkness and not turn away." Eveline felt her own walls begin to crumble. For years, she had feared this man's reputation, imagining cruelty where perhaps there was loneliness. And now, standing before her, Cale seemed less like a monster and more like a man shaped by forces he could barely control. You mean me?" she whispered. Cale's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Yes, you." For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, two souls reaching across a chasm of fear and expectation. The storm outside mirrored the storm within her, wild, uncontrollable, yet strangely exhilarating. Suddenly, a sound echoed from the castle, a low, whispering hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Cale stiffened, and his eyes darkened. "The shadows stir tonight," he murmured. "They do not often do so when I am near. But you must be cautious. This castle and I are not entirely safe." Eveline nodded, understanding despite her fear. I will be careful," she said. Her voice was steadier now, filled with a mix of determination and curiosity. Cale inclined his head. "Good. Fear is natural, but it must not rule you. You have already begun to see beyond the tales. That is the first step." They stood in silence again, the storm outside raging, lightning illuminating the corners of the chamber, revealing shadows that danced like living creatures. For the first time, Eveline sensed that this night, this meeting with the Duke, was only the beginning. A door had opened into a world she could not yet fully understand, a world of danger, desire, and secrets older than the kingdom itself. And then, in the quietest moment, Cale leaned closer. His voice, a whisper carried on the wind, barely audible, filled the chamber. "I've been waiting." The rest of his words were lost in the thunder that shook the castle walls. Eveline's heart leapt into her throat. Something about his tone, the softness behind the strength, made her fear and fascination merge into a single, unshakable sensation. She realized with a shiver that her life had changed forever. Outside, the storm raged on, lightning striking the cliffs below, waves crashing against jagged rocks. Inside, the castle seemed alive, full of secrets, shadows and promises yet to be fulfilled. Eveline drew a deep breath, steadying herself. She did not know what awaited her in the days to come, but she knew one thing with certainty. She could never forget this night or the man who had whispered words that stirred something deep within her soul. As she lay down, the shadows of the room seemed to shift around her, alive with quiet whispers. Somewhere, deep within the castle, secrets watched and waited. And somewhere else, Duke Kale stood in the darkness, thinking of her, of the fear he had inspired, and of the longing that had grown in his heart across endless nights of solitude. The night was only beginning. The morning came slowly, filtered through heavy gray clouds that hung over the castle like a morning veil. Rain still tapped against the tall windows, though softer now, as if the storm outside had begun to tire. Lady Eveline awoke in her chamber, the memory of Duke Kale's whisper still echoing in her mind. "I've been wait-I." She could not recall the rest of the words, but the tone lingered, carrying warmth, longing, and an unspoken promise. She rose carefully, her footsteps silent against the polished stone floor. The castle felt different in daylight. Shadows still lingered in the corners, but they seemed less threatening, more like guardians than predators. And yet Eveline could not shake the feeling that the walls themselves watched her, listening to her thoughts. As she made her way to the grand hall for breakfast, she noticed details she had not seen the night before. Portraits of stern ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow her, intricate carvings of creatures that were half human, half beast, and tapestries that depicted battles against forces she could not name. The castle was alive with stories, some whispered, some hidden, all waiting to be discovered. Kale appeared in the hall as she entered, dressed in dark, elegant clothing that suited his commanding presence. He nodded to her but did not speak immediately. The tension between them was palpable, yet it was no longer entirely fear. Eveline felt a flicker of curiosity, of something deeper stirring within her, a desire to understand him, to see the man behind the reputation. "Good morning," she said softly, testing the sound of her own voice. Kale's gaze met hers, steady and unreadable. "Good morning, Lady Eveline. I trust you slept well?" "Yes." Though it was a long night, she admitted, choosing her words carefully. "I am not used to such a large castle, or such stories." He smiled faintly, a shadow of amusement passing across his face. "Stories are always larger than truth. Fear inflates what is already frightening. You will see, in time, that not all shadows are dangerous, and not all monsters are cruel." Eveline studied him, searching for sincerity. There was a depth in his dark eyes that suggested he spoke truth, yet she sensed the weight of something he could not fully reveal. The breakfast hall was quiet, the servants moving silently as they served bread, cheese, and steaming tea. Eveline tried to eat, but her appetite was lost to the thoughts of the night before and the uncertainty of the days to come. Culain sat across from her, observing, but not intruding. There was a stillness to him, a calm that felt unnatural in a man so feared. After breakfast, Kale stood. "I will show you the castle," he said. "It is important that you know where you are and what is hidden here. There are places even I rarely enter, and secrets you must understand before the shadows find you unaware." Eveline followed him, curiosity overcoming her lingering fear. They passed through long corridors, some lit by sunlight filtering through narrow windows, others cloaked in darkness despite the day. Kale's hand occasionally brushed against the walls, and she noticed that the shadows seemed to recoil slightly from his touch. "This castle, it feels alive," Eveline murmured. "In a way it is," Kyle said, his voice low. "The walls remember. The stones hold memory, and the shadows, they remember even more. They are tied to my family, to the blood that rules this house. Most people do not understand them. Most fear them, and most are wise to do so." Eveline's steps faltered. "Your family, are you saying they are cursed?" Kale's eyes darkened, and for a moment he seemed far away, lost in memories she could not glimpse. "Cursed is a word too simple. Let us say bound. Bound to forces that are older than the kingdom itself, forces that I struggle to contain each day." Some nights I succeed. Other nights, the shadows rise and I must fight to keep them from consuming the castle. Or myself. Eveline felt a chill, though it was not entirely from the air. And the people? Do they know? They whisper. They fear, but they do not understand, Cale said. His voice softened. And now, you must understand as well. But fear not, Eveline. I do not intend to let you be harmed by what I cannot always control. They entered a room lined with books, ancient tomes, stacked upon shelves that reached the ceiling. The air smelled of parchment and candle wax. Cale moved to a table, opening one of the heavier volumes. Eveline approached, her fingers tracing the faded letters. These books, are they spells? She asked. Not always, Cale replied. Some are histories, some are warnings, some are instructions. The shadows do not obey reason alone. They respond to knowledge, to intent, to control. One day you may need to understand more than you wish. Eveline's mind raced. The man she feared was not merely cruel. He was burdened, trapped by forces older than himself. She could not ignore the growing fascination she felt. Her fear mingled with empathy, and something else, a strange, almost magnetic pull toward him. Cale closed the book with a soft thud. You must be cautious. The shadows are unpredictable. They test those who enter this castle. They will test you as well. You have courage, I can see that. But courage alone may not be enough. Then, will you teach me? Eveline asked, surprising herself with the question. Cale regarded her silently, then nodded slowly. In time. But first, you must understand what is at stake. The shadows are not mere stories or superstition. They are tied to life itself. One misstep, and they can take more than your fear. They can take your very essence. The day passed in a haze of corridors, hidden staircases, and rooms she had never imagined existed. Cale revealed fragments of his history, tales of ancestors who had struggled with the same darkness and the sacrifices they had made to protect the kingdom. Eveline listened, enthralled and frightened, realizing that the man before her was shaped not by cruelty, but by duty, fear, and loneliness. As evening approached, the castle seemed to transform. The fading sunlight made the shadows longer, deeper, and more alive. Eveline could feel the air grow thick, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. They stood together in a high tower overlooking the stormy sea. Lightning flashed, illuminating the jagged cliffs and dark waters below. Eveline shivered, and Cale draped a cloak around her shoulders. You feel it, do you not? He asked quietly. The presence that lingers here. It watches. It waits. It tests those who dwell within these walls. Eveline nodded, gripping the cloak tightly. I feel it. It is alive. Cale's expression softened. Yes, but it is not entirely hostile. It respects strength, courage, and understanding. And I believe you have all three, though you may not see it yet. Her heart leapt at his words, a mixture of pride and fear swelling within her. She wanted to trust him, to believe in the safety his presence promised. But even as she looked into his eyes, she sensed the weight he carried, the constant vigilance, the battle against shadows that were not his alone. Night fell, draping the castle in a thick, inky darkness. Candles flickered in the corridors, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move with intention. Eveline returned to her chamber, exhausted but unable to sleep. Her thoughts drifted to Cale, to the glimpses of his vulnerability, and to the quiet kindness that had slipped through the fearsome facade. Then, as she was about to close her eyes, a faint whisper drifted through the room. She froze, straining to listen. It was not her imagination.
Eveline, her breath caught.
The voice was soft, almost tender, carrying the weight of longing and time itself. She turned, heart hammering, and saw Cale standing at the doorway, shadows pooling around him. I should not disturb you, he said quietly. But the shadows, they stir tonight. Something moves in the castle, testing me, testing you. Eveline's fear rose, but it was tempered by something else. Trust. Fragile, but real. "What do we do?" she asked. Cale stepped closer, the shadows curling around him without menace. "We face it. Together. But know this. The darkness is not just around us. It is within as well. Courage alone will not protect you. You must understand. You must believe. And you must not turn away." The storm outside had returned, rain lashing against the windows, thunder rolling through the halls. Eveline felt the weight of the castle, the history, the shadows, and the man who had become both her protector and her mystery. Cale reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "Do not fear me, Eveline. Fear the shadows. But know this, I will not let them claim you." She looked into his eyes, dark and intense, and felt something shift within her. A spark of courage, of connection, of something that might one day grow into trust or even love. Suddenly a sound echoed from the halls outside, a low, whispering hum, like the castle itself breathing. Cale stiffened, his hand gripping hers.
"They test us," he said, voice tense. "They will not stop."
"We must be ready." Eveline nodded, gripping his hand tightly. For the first time she felt that she might not be entirely alone in this castle, that perhaps the man she had feared could become her anchor in the storm. And then, in the flickering candlelight, Cale whispered again, his voice carrying a promise and a warning. "I've been waiting." The words trailed into the shadows unfinished, leaving Eveline's heart racing. The storm outside raged on. The castle seemed to pulse with life, and somewhere deep within the walls the shadows watched, waiting for the next move. The night had only begun. The castle had grown darker since Eveline's arrival, though the sun still struggled through the storm clouds outside. Shadows clung to the corners of every room, thick and almost alive, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Eveline had begun to notice them not with fear, but with a quiet awareness. She had begun to understand that they were part of the castle's history, part of Cale himself, and perhaps a test for her courage. Cale led her through corridors she had not seen before, staircases that spiraled into the unknown, and doors that opened to secret chambers filled with books, artifacts, and symbols older than the kingdom itself. Eveline followed, her steps tentative but determined. She could feel his presence behind her, steady, commanding, yet strangely protective. "This castle is full of secrets," Cale said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some are dangerous, some reveal truths. You must learn to see the difference." Eveline nodded. "I want to understand." "I want to know why the shadows exist, and why you carry them with you." Cale's expression darkened, as if the question stirred memories too heavy to name. "It is not easy to explain. The shadows are older than this kingdom. They are tied to my family by blood, by fate, and by choices made long before I was born. Some nights I succeed in keeping them contained. Other nights they test me and those who are near me." She shivered, but held her ground. "And I am near you." "Yes," he said, and for the first time there was no mask over his voice, just a quiet vulnerability. "And that changes everything." Eveline's pulse quickened. She could not ignore the pull she felt toward him, a mixture of fear, fascination, and something deeper, something almost like destiny. The more she learned of his life, the more she saw a man shaped not by cruelty, but by responsibility, loneliness, and a struggle few could imagine. Their footsteps echoed as they reached a large hall, lined with mirrors that reflected the stormy sky outside. Kyle paused before one, his reflection fractured by the aged glass. "This hall has long been a place of reflection for my family," he said softly. "Not just for appearances, but for truth. What we hide from the world, what we hide from ourselves. It often comes here first." Eveline approached, studying her own reflection. She saw a young woman shaped by fear and duty, yet also by determination and curiosity. And behind her, Cale's reflection looked back at her, a man burdened with shadows, yet still capable of care, of longing, and of trust. "There is a ritual," Cale said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "A way to lessen the hold of the shadows. It is not simple, and it is not without risk. But it is the only way to protect both the castle and those who dwell within it." Eveline's eyes widened. "A ritual? What does it require?" Cale's gaze softened, but there was a weight in it that made her stomach tighten. "It requires trust, courage, and a willingness to face the darkness within oneself. Not just the shadows that haunt this castle, but the ones each of us carries in our hearts." The words struck her deeply. She thought of her own fears, the doubt she had carried her whole life, and the courage it would take to step forward willingly. And yet, a part of her, a part she could not name, wanted to try, wanted to reach out to him, wanted to prove that she could stand beside him, not behind him. That evening, the castle seemed alive in ways she had not noticed before. The flicker of candlelight made the walls seem to breathe, and shadows moved in the corners like silent dancers. Cale led her to a hidden chamber, a place of stone and quiet, where the ritual could begin. "You will not face this alone," Cale said, his hand brushing hers briefly. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a warmth through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire in the room. "We will do this together. But no, it will test us. It will reveal what we fear most." Eveline nodded, swallowing hard. "I am ready." The ritual began with a simple act, Cale guiding her through a series of meditations and exercises meant to focus her mind and body. He spoke of shadows not as enemies but as parts of oneself, fears, doubts, regrets, and taught her to face them with courage rather than denial. Eveline felt the castle respond to their presence, the air thickening, the shadows stirring, as if aware of the attempt to bridge the gap between light and darkness. Hours passed, and as night deepened, the ritual grew more intense. Shadows coalesced around them, testing their resolve, whispering fears and doubts that seemed drawn from their own memories. Eveline faltered, the whispers clawing at her courage. But Cale's hand found hers, steadying her, grounding her. "You are stronger than you think," he said softly. "Do not let them see fear in your heart." With his guidance, she took a deep breath, centering herself. Slowly the shadows began to retreat, drawn back by the strength of their combined will. Eveline felt a surge of triumph, mixed with relief, exhaustion, and something more profound. A bond with Cale that went beyond fear, beyond respect. After the ritual, they collapsed onto the floor of the chamber, breathing heavily. Their faces were close, shadows flickering across their features. Eveline looked into his eyes, seeing not only the exhaustion, but the vulnerability he rarely showed to anyone. You trust me?" she whispered. Cale's gaze softened. "I do. For the first time in many years, I can trust someone fully. You have proven courage, patience, and understanding. That is rare." Her heart fluttered. "And I feel like I am beginning to understand you." For a long moment silence stretched between them, filled only with the quiet hum of the castle. And then, Cale spoke again, his voice almost a sigh. "The shadows test us, but they also teach us. They show what we must face, what we must protect, and what we must hold dear." Eveline felt a warmth spread through her chest, stronger than the fear that had accompanied her since she entered the castle. "I will stand with you," she said quietly. "No matter what comes." Cale's hand brushed her cheek, gentle yet deliberate. "And I
I will stand with you. You must know. This is not a game, Eveline. The darkness will come again, and it may not be so forgiving."
A distant roar echoed through the castle, a sound that was neither wind nor storm. The shadows in the corners of the chamber flickered violently. Cale's expression tightened, and he rose quickly, moving to a hidden doorway that led deeper into the castle. "You must stay here," he said, voice firm but tense. "The shadows stir more than usual tonight. I must face them. But do not leave this room. Trust me to return." Eveline nodded, fear clawing at her but also a strange determination. She watched him disappear into the darkness, the shadows curling around him like living smoke. And then silence fell, heavy and tense. Hours passed. Eveline remained in the chamber, every sound of the castle amplified in the quiet. Her mind raced with thoughts of Kael, of the shadows, of the rituals and the dangers he had faced alone for years. She realized with a mixture of fear and awe how much he had endured and how much he had been waiting. For someone to see him, to understand him, to share the weight of the darkness. Then, a sudden movement caught her eye. A shadow, larger than any she had seen, slithered across the floor of the chamber. Her breath caught. She wanted to run, but her feet remained rooted to the spot. She remembered Kael's words: courage, understanding, trust. The shadow hesitated, as if sensing her resolve, and then recoiled into the corners of the room. Moments later, Kael returned, his presence filling the chamber like a protective force. He looked exhausted but resolute. Eveline ran to him, grasping his hand. "They tried to break me," he said quietly, "but I held. And now, we are stronger for it. But know this, there will be other nights, other challenges. The shadows are patient, and they are clever." Eveline nodded, her heart racing. "Then we will face them together." Kael's eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, the fearsome Duke seemed almost human, a man shaped by shadows, but capable of tenderness. "Together," he agreed, and for the first time his voice carried something more than authority or warning. A glimmer of hope, a promise that perhaps the darkness could be shared and not suffered alone. As they stood together, the candlelight flickering, the shadows retreating, Eveline felt a shift within her. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, and she had survived. More than that, she had begun to see the man behind the Duke, the man who had waited for someone to share his world, someone strong enough to face the darkness at his side. But even in this moment of fragile triumph, Eveline sensed the tension that lingered, the quiet warning that the shadows were not defeated, only held at bay. And deep within the castle, somewhere in the twisting corridors and hidden chambers, other forces watched, patient, waiting for the next moment to test the courage, the hearts, and the bond between the Duke and the lady who had dared to stand beside him. And once again, Kael's voice whispered softly in the darkness, just for her. "I've always waited for you, but the night is not yet done." The storm outside began to rise again, wind howling along the cliffs, and the castle seemed to pulse with life and secrets. Eveline knew that the coming days would test them both in ways she could not yet imagine, but for the first time she felt ready to meet them. The dance of fire and ice had begun. The storm had returned with a fury that shook the castle to its very foundations. Lightning split the sky above the jagged cliffs, illuminating the castle in stark white flashes. Rain lashed against the stone walls, drumming like a warning. Lady Eveline stood at the top of the tower, her hair plastered to her face, eyes wide with fear and determination. Kael had left hours before, chasing a disturbance in the shadows that had grown more aggressive, more restless with each passing night. Eveline could feel the tension in the air, the way the walls themselves seemed to hold their breath. The shadows had sensed her courage in the previous ritual, but now they were angry, testing both her and Kael with renewed force. She clenched her hands, trying to steady her racing heart. She had spent days learning, practicing, and facing fear alongside him. But tonight, the stakes felt higher than ever. Kael had warned her. The shadows did not forgive. They did not relent. And for the first time, Eveline realized that their lives depended not just on courage, but on trust, unity, and the choices they would make in the heat of battle. The sound came first, a low, vibrating hum, as if the castle itself were alive with fury. Shadows swirled through the halls, darker than she had ever seen, moving with purpose, closing in from every corridor, every stairwell. Eveline's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to breathe. Kael had shown her that fear was not weakness. It was a signal, a guide. She had to act, not flee. "Kael," she called, her voice carrying over the storm. "Where are you?" A shadow flickered near the doorway, and then he was there. Duke Kael, his form illuminated by lightning, his eyes sharp and focused, his hands glowing faintly as if holding the very air at bay. But there was a strain to him, a visible weight of effort, and Eveline's heart twisted. "The shadows," he said, voice tight. "They are stronger tonight. I cannot hold them alone. You must stand with me." Eveline stepped forward, lifting her chin.
I will.
"We face this together." Kale's gaze softened for a fleeting moment, and in it she saw gratitude, fear, and longing all at once. Then he turned back to the encroaching darkness. "Trust me, Eveline, and trust yourself." The shadows respond to both. Together they move through the halls. Shadows surge toward them like living waves, whispering doubts, memories, and fears. Some hers, some Kale's. The castle trembled as if groaning under the weight of centuries of darkness. Yet each time a shadow came too close, Kale's presence and Eveline's newfound courage pushed it back. "You must reach into the center," Kale shouted over the storm. "Face the core of your fear. Only then can you protect us both." Eveline nodded. She remembered the lessons he had taught her, the focus, the breath, the willingness to face the darkness without denying it. She closed her eyes, feeling the shadows pressing against her mind, whispering fears she had long buried, that she was not strong enough, that she would fail, that Kale might be lost. But then she opened her eyes, and in the flickering light she saw him, Kale struggling yet unwavering. And suddenly, fear became something else. It became purpose. She extended her hands, imagining a light, a force that reached into the shadows, not to destroy, but to understand, to contain, to balance. The shadows recoiled, hissing like wind through dead trees. Kale's glow strengthened as Eveline's courage joined with his. Together they formed a circle of light amid the dark, an unbroken bond of trust and strength. The shadows writhed, testing, but could not break them. Hours passed in this desperate silent battle. Time seemed to stretch, yet they moved as one, each sensing the other's intent without words. Eveline felt exhaustion in every fiber of her body, yet she did not falter. Kale's presence was a tether steadying her, giving her strength. And Kale, for his part, drew more power from her than from the spells he had learned over decades. She had become part of the balance he had struggled to maintain alone for years. Finally, the core of the shadow began to waver. The whispers grew faint, the black tendrils shrinking. Kale's voice broke through, clear and commanding. "Now, Eveline! Focus! Bind them with light and trust." She did, summoning every ounce of courage, every lesson, every trust she had placed in him. The shadow shuddered, twisting, and then, with a final loud roar that shook the walls, they dissipated, retreating into corners, ceilings, and the forgotten spaces of the castle. Silence fell, heavy and complete, as if the castle itself were sighing in relief. Eveline collapsed onto the floor, breathing hard, soaked from rain and sweat. Kale knelt beside her, his face softening as he looked at her. You did it."
We did it. Her chest heaved.
You held me." He shook his head slightly, smiling faintly. "No, we held each other. That is what made the difference. You have strength I did not know existed in another. You are brave, Eveline. Braver than many who have faced the shadows alone." Tears pricked at her eyes, not from fear, but from the release of tension, the overwhelming relief, and the strange, powerful bond that had grown between them. I could not have done it without you," she whispered. Kale reached out, brushing her hair from her face. "And I could not have done it without you. You see me truly and you do not turn away." That is more than I have ever known. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, two souls connected by trial, fear, and triumph. The castle around them seemed to breathe gently, the darkness now retreating, leaving the warmth of candlelight and the calm after the storm. Kyle rose, extending his hand to help her. "Come," he said softly. "Let us leave this place for a moment. Feel the dawn. The night is over, at least for now." Together they climbed the spiral staircase to the highest tower, emerging onto the terrace just as the first rays of the sun pierced the storm clouds. The sky was painted in colors Eveline had never seen. golds, pinks, and pale blues blending into the receding darkness. Waves crashed against the cliffs below, echoing the rhythm of her still-beating heart. Cale stood beside her, silent, watching the horizon. She turned to him, and in that moment fear was gone, replaced by a profound respect, admiration, and something deeper. An unspoken connection that bound their hearts. "You've changed," he said quietly. "Not just the castle, but me. You've reminded me what it is to hope, to trust, to feel." Eveline smiled faintly. "And you've taught me courage. Not just the courage to face shadows, but to face life itself. To see people as they truly are." Cale's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Then perhaps we are, even now, free. Not from the past, not from the shadows entirely, but free to choose our path." The wind tugged at their clothes, the sun warmed their faces, and the castle seemed still, finally at peace. Eveline leaned slightly against Cale, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his presence. "And will the shadows ever return?" she asked softly. Cale's gaze softened, dark eyes reflecting both the scars of battle and the light of hope. "Perhaps. But we will face them together. And now we know we can endure more than either of us imagined." The sun rose higher, casting light on the ruins of corridors, the high towers, the spaces that had been haunted by centuries of shadow. And yet, in that light, the castle felt alive in a new way. No longer only a place of fear, but a place of resilience, courage, and the bond between two people who had faced darkness and survived. Cale turned to Eveline, his expression soft but firm. "I've waited centuries and now you are here. Not by fear, not by duty, but by choice." Eveline looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she did not see the terrifying Duke the world had whispered about. She saw a man shaped by struggle, haunted yet tender, commanding yet vulnerable. "And I choose to be here," she said, voice steady, filled with warmth and certainty. "With you," he smiled, a rare, full smile that reached his eyes and softened the shadows lingering there. "Then let us face the days to come," he said. "Not as master and servant, not as duke and lady, but as equals, as partners, as something more." Eveline took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Something more," she agreed, and together they looked out at the kingdom, the cliffs, and the endless horizon beyond. The storm had passed, the shadows had receded, though they would always remain as reminders of what had been faced and overcome. The castle, once a place of fear and whispers, now held light, hope, and the quiet promise of new beginnings. And on that terrace, with the wind in their hair and the sun warming their faces, Cale and Eveline stood together, scarred but stronger, tested but unbroken, bound not by fear, but by choice, trust, and the enduring power of courage, love, and redemption. The dance of fire and ice had ended. A new dawn had begun.